One of the things that happens when you become a grandparent is that you gain a new perspective. Perhaps it's because the anxiety of parenthood runs so high. We never get a chance to step back and to put it all in perspective in the way that one can when one can send the kids home and the anxiety is reduced. Whatever the case, when my first grandchild was born, I saw the world very differently. I saw it with a new perspective. I recognized that my part in a much larger story was quite small. It was important, but not the end all. For the story had a future, a promising and long-lasting future that would go on long after I walked the face of this earth. And discovering my mother last year, I now am able to recognize that my story began a long time ago and stretches back generation after generation. That perspective is important, particularly when we find our lives in times of chaos. We think it's the end. We think everything depends upon us. We think every moment is critical. And while they're important, it's not the end. The end is even now unfolding. And we are but a piece to push it forward. We are part of a much larger story. As Christians, we believe that is God's story, and that its beginning and its end are far bigger than anything that is going on right now at this moment. The story takes a dramatic turn with the advent of Jesus, God in flesh, who walks the earth and becomes the embodiment of that story. He comes out of the waters of his baptism, announcing that the kingdom of God has come near. It's arriving. Just turn around and look. You'll see it coming. Believe and live into that moment of God's grace. A new story? No, to understand the kingdom of God is to understand the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the story of Moses and Aaron, the story of the prophets and the kings. It is to immerse oneself in the wisdom tradition. All of that part of the story prepares us now to hear those words of Jesus. God has tried time and time again to introduce the kingdom of mercy, justice, loving kindness, and shalom. And for brief shining moments, it looks like it's going to be established. And then we manage to screw it up. But God is persistent. He recognizes that we can't do it on our own. If the kingdom is to be established, God will establish it. And that's exactly what God does in Jesus the Christ. He establishes the unfolding story of his kingdom in our midst. What Jesus calls us to do is to live into the reality of that kingdom, to become a people of mercy, justice, loving kindness, and peace. so that the world around us may see what that looks like. The Gospel of Mark is a fascinating gospel. It has always been my favorite. Mark puts the story in this perspective and puts us in the midst of the story. He announces at the opening line, this is the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. It's not the end. And the end will not come when the gospel is finished. We are left with an empty tomb and the women running away for fear. Mark dumps the gospel, the good news, the kingdom, into our laps and asks the question, unspoken in the gospel, but very evident in its pages. Who's going to tell the story? Who's going to be the story in this time and place? Knowing that we're not the end of the story, but that we are a piece of that story. And we push it forward for our children and our grandchildren, that they too may see the signs of the kingdom and come to live into that world of God's grace, of mercy, of justice, of loving kindness, of shalom. Rise, shine, you people, Christ the Lord has entered. Our human story, God in him is centered. He comes to us by death and sin surrounded, with grace unbounded. See how he sends the powers of evil reeling. He brings us freedom, light and life and healing. All men and women who by guilt are driven are now forgiven. Come celebrate, your banners high unfurling, your songs and prayers against the darkness hurling. To all the world go out and tell the story of Jesus' glory. Tell how the Father sent the Son to save us. Tell of the Son whose life and freedom gave us. Tell how the Spirit calls from every nation, God's new creation.